Let me start by saying that the subject of Pan-Africanism is one that remains as important today as it was, in my view, many years ago. Those of you who are familiar with the struggle for Pan-Africanism will remember its story, particularly through the activities of Africans in the diaspora. You'll particularly remember that prior to the much more famous meeting held in 1945 in Manchester, in the United Kingdom, Africans in the diaspora, particularly in the Caribbean, in Trinidad and Tobago, in Jamaica, were very particular about having connection with the continent of Africa. You'll remember that they had many meetings, and you'll be familiar with some of the names, such as Sylvester Williams from Trinidad and Tobago, such as Marcus Garvey, and his call for Africans to go back to the mother continent. And you will also remember African Americans such as W.B.E. Du Bois, who was very active in the process of liberating the African Americans from the clutches of slavery and discrimination, and who also played a very critical part in the struggle for decolonization, culminating in the 1945 meeting, which for the first time was attended by Africans who later played a critical role in the struggle for decolonization. Of course, Ethiopia does stand out to the extent that it was never successfully colonized. There was limited occupation, and you are familiar with that history. Therefore, it is not mine to educate you on your own history, but you are familiar with it. But it must concern us, particularly at this time. And I hope during this conversation I'll be able to demonstrate why, in order for us to understand the present, we must understand the past, which will also enable us to have a glimpse on what the future holds. And one of the speeches which is seldom referred to is a speech that was delivered in the year 1906, in the month of April, by a South African called Pixley Kaisaka Seme. And it is instructive that Pixley Kaisaka Seme was the first president of the African National Congress when it was founded in 1912. When Pixley Kaisaka Seme delivered that speech as a student at the University of Columbia, his title was The Regeneration of Africa. And what he was talking about at that time was an Africa that had borne the brunt of slavery and was laboring under the pain of colonization. Pixley Kaisaka Seme reminded his audience on that day that when the European powers assembled in Berlin in 1884 through to 1885, they agreed to divide Africa into spheres of influence for purposes of exploitation, so that the Germans had their share. If you remember, the Germans were present in what we now call Namibia. They were present in what we now call Benin, but was then known as Dahomey. They were present in what is now a part of Ghana, which was then the Togoland, the Volta area. The Belgians were present in Rwanda and Urundi, and they were also present in what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo. The Italians, to the extent that they could, tried to occupy Ethiopia and Eritrea, and were present in a portion of Somalia. The British were present, of course, in Uganda, in Kenya, in Nyasaland, in Rhodesia, and in Nigeria, and in many other places. The French, of course, were also present. And all these powers, even the Spaniards, were present in Equatorial Guinea, as were the Portuguese. And the whole idea was to use the resources, both natural and human, of the African continent, so that the partition of Africa was one that was designed to benefit the European powers. The partition was arbitrary. If you look at the nation states that we now have, or is it states that we now have, with many nations in them, every other African country that we are talking about now is struggling to be a state. All of them, without exception, all of them.